Affordable energy is something many of us are concerned about these days, and it just so happens that we have the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy joining us today. Dan McTeague served as a Liberal MP for over 18 years in Ontario, and some of you might use apps like Gas Wizard to check out local gas prices. Well, that is part of McTeague's company as well. Dan McTeague, thanks so much for joining me today. Great to have you with us.
Good to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So first off, can you maybe give us a quick little snapshot of what your organization is all about?
Well, it has a lot to do, obviously, with gas price prediction, but to talk more policy about energy prices that have, prices have alarmed a lot of people in this country. Most people who drive are concerned that a country like Canada, blessed with an abundance of resources, most notably our energy, fossil fuels, whether that be natural gas, propane, oil, jet fuel, gasoline, finds itself paying extraordinarily high prices for fuel, which in turn, pardon the pun, fuels inflation. And the higher the cost of energy isn't just proportionally, impacting the bottom line for most consumers and most families. It's also, of course, increasing the price of everything else. And so, over 30 years of in parliamentary work, energy sector, automotive sector, we put all this together to try to provide some policy insights or response that has not really always been very clear from those who simply take what the government has to say or actors have to say and accept it for what it is. We try to provide it and contextualize it and give people the other side of the equation. And usually, over time, we tend not to be too far from what actually happens. We were correct on the EV mandates, correct on the carbon taxes. They were very damaging. And we're also, of course, looking after the bigger issue, which is Canada's imposing on itself net zero. And that's a lot of the focus here at affordableenergy.ca. A lot of followers, but a lot of people open for debate and know that there's always more than one side to a story.
For sure, definitely. Okay, so Dan, now that we have a new prime minister, just switching gears for a second here, can we just backtrack a little bit and chat briefly about the leadership race itself? Do you have any concerns about the manner in which it was conducted?
Well, I joined the Liberal Party in 1974, active since 1978 in a real way, ran a number of campaigns, became a member of Parliament in 93, sworn in as a Privy Councillor, cabinet status by 2003, stayed until 2011. The Liberal Party has changed. It's a very different organization than that which I had come to and served for 40 years, and the Liberal Party that preceded me. Which of course was all about creating opportunities for people and creating, ideas of social accountability as opposed to socialism. The Liberal Party has taken a far left leap, and in the process left a lot of traditional liberals scratching their heads saying, is this really about diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental, social governance? Is it about post-national state? I mean, this may very well serve a particular constituency in this country, but it's not where the Liberal Party has been, which has always been at the center of where Canadians find themselves. And increasingly, the party has tried to lead itself into a far left corner, which I think is really alienating it from the base, no matter who the leader is. And of course, with Mark Carney not being elected, ever being in politics, never been subject to the acid test of public approval. Now governing the country as prime minister, it seems a little bizarre for a country that prides itself on its parliamentary democracy, a democracy and parliamentary system that really hasn't functioned since last September.
Okay, so what do you think could and should be done to swing that Liberal Party pendulum more back to a centrist party?
Well, fiscal responsibility, I think, would be the first one. We demonstrated that in the 1990s when the country was hitting the financial brink, and I think that's where we are today. We had a $20 billion deficit back in those days, or approaching that amount. Today it's 62 billion, and that doesn't include what provinces may have incurred as well. That debt or deficit to GDP is pretty substantial, and if you think about 62 billion in an economy that's less than $2 trillion, it's now making up roughly about 12% of our GDP, which is very scary. Of course, we have $1.4 trillion debt overall. Those numbers may be eye-watering for some and perhaps sobering for others, and certainly put in context with where the Americans are. It may not be as great, but it does mean that a country that sees a significant decline in its economic outlook, its so-called GDP, productivity, labor GDP has dropped dramatically to the lowest levels in the OECD. it does paint a very gloomy picture for the future of the country. And of course, we have a nation that hasn't and a party that hasn't recognized that its most valuable assets are in fact its resources and getting them to market, something this particular brand of the Liberal Party has completely shut down and denied and turned its back on, and belief that you could somehow wave a magic wand and change the weather and have all sorts of policies surrounding the deconstruction of very things that make us tick as a nation. It's also one of the main reasons why I think Canadians are very alarmed that their standard of living, the cost of living is rising, their standard of living is dropping precipitously. That's where the Liberal Party has to go. That's where the public is at. And it's time for real action as opposed to, ideas and thoughts that are really, more aspirational than they are based on reality.
Looking back to Friday, March 14th, their new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, being sworn in. And on day one, what did he do? He stopped the consumer carbon tax. Can he actually do this on his own, though, or does this need to be voted in Parliament?
Had some experience in passing legislation in my time, including some of my own private members' bills. But look, unless we're talking criminal code, laws are really the blueprint, the permission that Parliament gives to a particular set of laws. Within those laws, the framework that makes up those laws, has to follow the legislation. So the legislation is still there. The regulations as to how to tweak it, how to put it together, how to flush it out is what has been amended here very temporarily. He hasn't said this is going to be permanent. He said he's going to pause it. It just means that the same old, deadly, pernicious, costly carbon tax is going to be there. And one of the suggestions that he's made is, I will go after the consumer carbon tax so that people actually don't see it. It disappeared during the period of the campaign in the hopes that you and I vote for them, only to have it restored, not necessarily as a carbon tax for consumers, but as an industrial business carbon tax. In other words, impose the burden on business who will then promptly put it right back on our shoulders. For the Liberals, and for the NDP, it's a great scheme because then they can blame the oil companies for their price rise. But folks like me who have no affinity to the oil industry have taken them on will be very quickly point out that if people vote for Mark Carney and his friends in the NDP, they're basically voting themselves a restoration of those very damaging, very costly policies. And make no mistake, as I've heard the leader of the Conservative Party, who I'm not a member of, I've never contributed to, saying he's going to get rid of them. If Canadians want a stark choice in the next campaign, it's the guys who brought you pain, that's the Liberal and NDP, Greens, or the guys who are promising to get rid of it. And I sense that where most Canadians are is that it's not a necessary tax. It's based on CO2. I could never think of a more frivolous means by which we would want to tax anyone, much less make a couple of green grifters very happy and rich.
Yeah, well, and according to the guy who says he wants to get rid of it, so Pierre Poilievre says that this carbon tax legislation is still in place and it hasn't been revoked. So the government could put it back in place again if they feel that it's warranted?
And they will.
Okay.
And they will. Look, I can tell you, it's a shell game. Pardon the pun. They're going to take it off so that you vote for them, and the moment you vote for them, they'll do what they did last time. In 2019, they said no, we wouldn't let carbon taxes go above $80. $80, which is where it is now, $80 a ton. It's going to 170 because they broke their commitment. They said that they would let this thing go even higher. Could even go even higher. But reality is that Mr. Carney doesn't want to give people transparency in what he's doing. He wants to hide it, and he wants to force businesses to absorb it. We'll then proceed to promptly pass it on. Second thing, you pay 2 carbon taxes. And a lot of people don't know this. So it's 17.61 cents a litre plus GST. So in the province of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, that means it's about 19.85 cents a litre. That's going up 4 cents a litre on April 1st without the pause. But if the government, the Liberals, are restored to power, they'll make that go to 37 cents a litre plus GST. Not only that, it'll be buried and you won't be able to see it. It'll be buried in the industrial tax, the industrial carbon tax, which you don't see, but which you and I are currently paying about 4 cents a litre for. That's eventually going to go to 20 cents a litre by 2030. So if you think you have a hard time affording things now with this artificial rise in the prices of energy, you ain't seen nothing yet. And I really hope Canadians are prepared to have the wool pulled over their eyes on this.
Oh, that's scary. So what it sounds like Carney is promising right now is that to raise the taxes for industrial emitters so that this will put money back into our pockets, or will the industrial carbon tax end up being passed on to the consumers?
Yeah, it'll come back on the consumers, and currently you get a bit of a rebate. You won't even get that. So maybe there'll be some tweaking, some adjustments. But Mr. Carney's made it very clear he likes the carbon tax. He likes what it's done. It may not have been seen as palatable, which is why they're going to take it away and blind consumers to actually what they're paying, so that they don't see what it actually is, and bury it as they currently do in what some call the clean fuel standard. That was the second carbon tax we lamented in 2021. The federal government came out with, some really interesting ideas as to what this would do. They never did a proper cost-benefit analysis. We found, through our help with Professor Ross McKittrick, Guelph University economist, that for every dollar of advantage the second carbon tax had of benefit, it actually cost consumers $6. So at the end of the day, they don't really care. It's not about what you think. It's about what they think. They know what's best, and they believe that CO2, the inert gas being emitted from Canada, is somehow going to change the weather around the world. That's fanciful thinking, and it's the kind of nonsense that's got this country in the position that's in. My credibility on this issue is that I would say the same thing to my Liberal caucus had they decided to propose this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was an MP. It wouldn't have flown then, because it was a very different Liberal Party. This party is not, as I said, suggested, the same pragmatic Liberal Party that I was once part of. It's very much a cult that believes in certain international narratives that are extraordinarily, diminishing to Canada and very damaging to the country. No other no other energy producing nation would dare do something like this to itself. Why the hell is Canada doing this? Because we believe that Mr. Carney, who's the one responsible for diverting pipelines away from Canada, getting his company to move to the United States, taking claims of all sorts of things that he didn't do, including saving the country, balancing the debt in 1998, to saving the country in the global economic crisis. Same man who is being looked at in the United States for his GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, for constraining finances for oil and gas sectors. They're now looking at a potential major antitrust suit against him. It's one of the reasons the banks have simply walked away from this nonsense. I'm very concerned about this man. I'm concerned about the impact he's going to have on Canadians. They should not be deceived, if at all, for anything.
So what would you change about it then, if you could, Dan? If you could change the party, the leader, any of it?
I would make it based on sound policies, pragmatism. I would look for consensus. I would look to ensure that, as what we did, we tried to make sure that what was good for Ontario and Quebec and the Atlantic Canada was also good for Western Canada and British Columbia. I wouldn't have taken policies that would be naturally divisive. We saw that back in the 1980s with Pierre Trudeau. We did the same thing under Justin Trudeau. Every leader in between those two has attempted to try to provide a national platform on which they could at least get some kind of, in various corners, some consensus on. We tried very hard, not just sort of imposition with a very tiny, fragile minority, hanging by a thread over several years, to impose things on people that they cannot afford, and for which is pitting one region against the other, pitting family against family, ideology against ideology, and at the end of the day saying Canada has no national identity. It's the post-national state. I think the country has had enough of interlopers with their own, exotic ideas as to what this country is, and not focused on what makes this country tick, not just for our generation, but for generations to come. And my caution is also to an older generation, the so-called gray rinse, like folks like me. You are in no position to destroy a country and do things selfishly for yourself that is going to harm the next generation or generations to come. We've put this country in a financial straitjacket because of our whimsical thinking about things like climate and all sorts of other nonsense. At the end of the day, we have to get back to reality. And reality tells us, get your books balanced, and make sure that you do something productive that invites the unity and the consensus of most Canadians, not the way we've seen over the past few years, which has been divide and conquer and lessening the country as I see it.
Yeah, I thought budgets balance themselves there, Dan, don't they?
You know what? That we joked about that. Justin was a bit of a goof, and I've said this before, but this Mark Carney is no fool. But he has a lot of people who are willing to be duped, and I'm not one of them. And I've said right from the outset, this is the man behind the levers of the government over the past 5 years. If you like what's happened in Canada the past 5 years, okay, I understand that. But if you know there's a problem, then you must vote accordingly and make sure these people are not returned to power anytime soon. And by the way, this election isn't about, orange-haired man bad. This is about Canadians losing their national identity and other nations, not just the United States, but China, realizing just how vulnerable we've made ourselves by making some really, really awful political choices. It's time for Canadians collectively, and I say this to my friends here in Ontario, smarten up.
That's about the time that we have there today, Dan. I'm so sorry. Didn't get to all my questions here, but thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Great to be here, Jen. Thanks.
Dan McTeague is the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.